Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sleep Mechanics and Strategy Talks Guide series. Now, in this episode, we're going over something very interesting, and that is Dedenne. Now, I've been working on this video for quite some time, and this video actually kind of stemmed from, I started working on my Dedenne Mon review episode, and I realized that there's just too much to talk about for a Mon review episode. And really, I have to make an entire video talking about how to value this skill before I can properly talk about how powerful Dedenne is. Because this skill is one of the weirdest skills in the game with how it works and how we can properly value it. A lot of players just really like to proc it as much as possible to just get the really high chance of a tasty proc on their meal. But realistically, that's not really how the skill can be optimally used. Now, huge shout out to Brovini. He made a video on this a while back, and it talked quite a bit about the concepts that I'm going to be discussing here. But I'm just expanding on those concepts here and made my own little spreadsheet, which I'll get into eventually. And I just want to give him that shout out, credit where credit is due. This video is heavily inspired by his work already in this field, so I'm just expanding on that concept and adding a little more depth and a new tool to help you. I will be making the spreadsheet available in the comments down below, or in the description, so that you guys can download this, make a copy of it, and then you can use this tool to evaluate how to best use your Dedenne in your circumstances based off of a collection of features. Now, before I get into it, I do want to say that down in the description of this video, we're going to have some timestamps. The first one is going to go to a spot in the video where I talk about how to properly use this calculator, so that if you want to download this and use it yourself, then you can and know how to read it. Because I'm going to discuss a lot of the math of all these numbers. These numbers really don't matter for anything unless you are a really big math nerd and want to see how it all works. But I'm going to talk about in that portion how to use these numbers, and particularly to evaluate your Dedenne, how to evaluate how to use your Dedenne. So you can skip there if you just want to learn how to use the calculator. If you want to just learn about the conclusions of Dedenne's skill and how to best use the Dedenne without actually applying the calculator yourself, I'll have a second timestamp in the description for that. Now, when it comes to this tool here that I've created, the first thing that I put down here is we gotta understand this procs and what this means. So I'm evaluating here if you just proc Dedenne X number of times, so here's 1 time, 0 time, 1 time, 2 time, 3 times, and then you take it off the team immediately, and you just wait until the meal crits, and then you get a crit on the meal, and you run Dedenne again. And you take it off the team again once you get a certain amount of procs. Then I am evaluating what is the value that first proc is going to be versus subsequent procs. Now, as you can see here, it gets diminishing returns, but I'll explain why that is here. So, this first column is the chance to crit on the Dedenne, or on the meal. A baseline without Dedenne, that's a 10% chance. If it's a Sunday, it's a 30% chance. So, if it's not a Sunday, and it procs, and you get a crit, this first thing is the odds that Dedenne was what caused the crit. Therefore, the crit, Dedenne's proc, actually had value. So, in order for that to have value, it needs to be what's causing the crit. So, it's at half the value of a meal. That's half the value of a meal because basic crits double it. So a crit is basically worth an additional 1 meal. And given that the single proc, the first proc, is 50% chance that it caused the proc, then that means that first proc is worth 50% of a meal. And that's where we get this number. Now, this number right here, so right here we have the odds, if you have 30%, it's now a 66.7% that the Dedenne is what caused the crit. The baseline percentage then is only 10% versus 20%, 2 to 1 odds in favor of Dedenne, comes to a 2 out of 3 total. That's where you get the 66.7%. But that only increased the odds of Dedenne causing the crit by 16.7%, which is where we get this number. And from here, this 8.3% comes the difference between this one to the next one, and so on and so forth. And that's where we get the proc value of each subsequent proc on Dedenne. That's if the meal crits prior to Sunday. Now this column is the odds of Dedenne causing the crit on Sunday, which it's only 25% chance to start because you have 1 to 4. 1 out of 4 procs is going to be caused by Dedenne if you only did 1 proc. So that's where I get this number from. That doubles into 50 because Sunday crits are worth 3 times the meals, so the crits are worth double of what in percentage of meals compared to what they would be every other day. So even though this is 25%, it's 50%, and so on and so forth. It adds 15% between each one, but then that becomes 30% because it gets doubled for the second proc, and so on and so forth, which is where we see those diminishing returns, and to the point where eventually, at a certain point, these procs are literally worth 0 because there's no difference between if they proc and if they don't, because the meal is already at maximum. You can see that I've made it that it automatically calculates all this no matter what level the Dedenne skill is at, from all the way from skill level 2 or skill level 1 all the way up to skill level 6, because that's what's currently in the game. And then I did something interesting. I used the binomial distribution calculation, if you know what that is. I used that calculation to figure out the odds based off how many meals you have remaining, the odds of the chance that it crits prior to Sunday, based off how many meals you have left. Let's say you have 3 left. You can see that the odds of it critting pre-Sunday is 0%, because there are no meals left for it to possibly be doing that. But if I go up to 4, you can see that they just have a flat amount equal to what it is, and so on and so forth. It goes up with every amount because that's how the binomial distribution works. And it goes all the way up to 21. You could put in 22, but you're not going to have 22 meals in a week. But it does account for that. Theoretically, it used to be possible to get 22 meals in a week. Fun fact. But then they made a bug patch so that you couldn't do that anymore. Fun fact about the history of the game there. Anyway, so this is the chance that it crits prior to Sunday. This is the chance that that proc takes into effect on Sunday, and this is the overall total chance of crit, and this is the chance that the proc is worth nothing because it gets to a point where it doesn't proc a crit at all throughout the course of the week. And ideally you want this number to be very low, because if that happens to you, then that sucks. It really hurts when that happens to you, so you want to see this number being really low, which is why I've kind of color-coded some stuff. Then I used, if you just look in this last cell, it takes the chances that it crits on Sunday, multiplies by the value of it in terms of meals on Sunday, and then multiplies by the meal value overall. And then we do the same thing for the procking prior to Sunday, multiply the chance that it crits prior to Sunday, multiply times the meal proc value when it's not Sunday, and then multiply times the meal. Add those two together, and we get the overall value of each individual proc for, depending upon the first one before meal crits, the second one before meal crits, and the third one before meal crits, and so on and so forth. So that's how I derive these numbers. Now, how am I using them? Well, I'm comparing them to Charge Strength M here. I've done a little comparison here, and I've seen that Dedenne is pretty comparable in the number of procs per day it gets compared to Ampharos. It's technically a little bit worse, but I figured the difference was so small, it could be basically negligible for the sake of this analysis, since there's a lot of, like, factors that are outside of the realm of what this is including. So, I just said, okay, if we want to see, if we're assuming that Dedenne procs the same amount of times as an Ampharos, then how many times do we want it to proc. We want it to be comparable to a charge strength M proc, because the opportunity cost of letting the Dedenne sit in longer is you could potentially be running a Pokemon that's going to be proccing the same amount of charge strength M procs, or producing more berries, or producing more ingredients, or something else. You could run anything else in that spot. Is it worth it to get more procs when they have the diminishing returns? And I'm using charge strength M as a baseline for that. Now, I made a comparison for if it's at skill level 6 or skill level 7. I assume most players are going to care most about the skill level 7, because are you really taking it to only skill level 6 because the Dedenne can only go to skill level 6? That's the reason why I threw that in there. So, skill level 7, for comparison's sake, is right here. Basically, based off island bonus, these things automatically calculate out the value of a skill level 7 or skill level 6. And then you put in the meal value for whatever you just see is coming in. Editor's note. This is me coming back in later while I was editing, because I forgot about something here. This miscellaneous bonus is just to say if your charge strength M Pokemon is stronger than your Dedenne, then you can add an extra little bonus. Like, let's say your charge strength M Pokemon procs 5% more times, then you can put that in there to get to boost the charge strength M, so that way you can see the difference. Let's say you have a Ampharos that has skill trigger M, your Dedenne doesn't have skill trigger M, so you want to say it's a 36% boost because it procs 36% more time. Then this will more fairly evaluate that based off of that. You can see the numbers might play a little differently, but that's in there for. Ignore that if your Ampharos or your charge strength M Pokemon is comparable to the Dedenne. I usually will probably just leave that on 0, because I think it's a more simple way of evaluating it, but I put that feature in there in case you wanted to use it. Meals left, skill level, you put all that information in, and now once you input the information down here, then you can come up here and take a look right here to see, is your Dedenne worth it to keep running? Now, if you'll find the less meals you have in the week, the higher the chance of waste goes up. If we get all the way down to like 5, then you'll start to see some yellow. 6, oh wait, nope, that's more. Yes, 5 is greater than 6, guys, totally. But as you get less and less meals throughout the week, you can see that the chance of waste starts to go up. But the value is more interesting, because you'll notice that throughout the course of the whole week, realistically, you can see that it's almost worth, the first proc right away is worth about the same amount as almost 4 procs of charge strength M. More than 4 procs if you have a meal value of 100k. Even if you have a meal value of, say, 60k, like I was talking about earlier, it's still worth almost like 2 2/3 procs of charge strength M level 7. That is tremendously powerful, and even if it double procs and gives you a second one, I mean, adding these two together, you get like 3 procs. That's still more efficient than a double proc on an Ampharos, who would only be getting you 2 procs in that meantime. So it looks like Dedenne really early on in the week is totally worth it to run, even with a weaker-ish meal. This isn't really a weak meal, but weaker compared to what I'm used to. If you're a really heavy cooking-focused player, then if you use this example dish that I generated, then you can really see that it is definitely worth it to let it proc maybe once, twice, maybe even 3 times before you take it off the team until you get a crit. Because as you can see here, it's worth like 7 charge strength M procs off of just 1 proc value. It's like 11, oh no, more like 10. Almost 10 off of the first 2. That is just insane. Dedenne is insane if you use it in this exact way and then swap it off. But the later procs are worth basically nothing. Now, what's very interesting though is as you get to less and less meals in the week, if I take this all the way down to 12, this would be on Friday meals. It's still pretty powerful to let it proc, and the chance of waste is really, really low still. If I let it go to Friday lunch, Friday dinner, oh, I guess it's not Friday, that's Thursday, isn't it? 9 would be Friday. Friday breakfast, Friday lunch, Friday dinner, we're still seeing that one proc is tremendously valued, and the chance of waste is still under 10%. I think that is definitely worth it. If you just got a proc, always just try to make it that you get one little proc of the Dedena, because you're seeing tremendous gains from that. But then, where it gets real bizarre is if it gets down to 6, 5, you start to see that the first proc gets to be less and less valuable, and the later procs start to get more and more. So when it gets to 3 meals left, the 6th proc is arguably worth it. And where these later ones become more worth it is, honestly, it takes your chance of wasting the proc entirely lower. I wouldn't really recommend using the Dedena to only have one proc when you only have 3 meals left, because the chance of the proc being worth absolutely nothing is significantly higher than what it was before, than when, say, you had like 21 meals where it was under 1%. That's why I've kind of coded this to turn yellow, orange, eventually red. I would say if it's red on this side, it's really not worthwhile working with. If it's red on this side, it's really not worthwhile working with, because it'd be better to just throw on an Ampharos or another strong Pokemon in its place during that time. But if it's green on both sides, go for it, and maybe that's the right amount. If it's yellow on one side and green on the other, maybe that's a good play as well, like here in the middle-ish for the calculator. But as you don't have less and less meals, especially if you only have like 1 meal left, just take the Dedena off. It's too much of a risk. You've got like a 30% chance that that thing gets wasted, 10% at the best. 1 in 10 still happens, and that would really hurt if you got to 6 procs before your dinner, and then it just didn't happen. That would be so sad. Now, as for some interesting conclusions about this analysis, you can see here that even just a level 1 proc earlier on in the week is still worth significantly more than even Charge Strength M7. You can see that if you let it be skill level 1, the first proc is worth 4.10 Charge Strength M7s, based off of the calculations that I've run. The second proc, still worth 2.34. A Dedena that's at level, that's got skill level 1, proccing twice, is more valuable than an Ampharos proccing 6 times. So it is definitely worthwhile to use, even if you don't have its skill maxed out. It's the one skill specialist where, honestly, I suggest maybe you run it at the start of a week to get those additional procs to increase the value that it gives. However, where it really, yes, then it's like, oh, well, what do we do with our skill seeds still? Why would we ever skill seed a Dedena if it works perfectly fine at level 1? The big difference is in the recharge time. Now, I've done a little other side calculation over here. This side calculation only really works if you set the calculator to 21 meals left per week, because of the way that I set it up. But basically, this is how many times it'll take before you get a crit. Meal before the next crit on average. So then this is going to be the average crits per week, and then the strength extracted throughout a week from Dedena. Because the idea is you're only running Dedena for a little bit until you get a proc, you take it off the team, and then you wait until you get a crit. Well, if you have a lower level Dedena, it's going to take longer before that crit occurs, which means you have a longer recharge time period between when you can run the Dedena and the next time, because of RNG. So the average strength extracted in a week, because you're able to run that Dedena more with a higher level skill, because it's obviously going to proc more, then, so the difference in the amount that you can run the Dedena is where the skill level comes into play. Level 1, you can see that even just doing the 1 proc a day strategy, or 1 proc before crit strategy, you get about 135,000 for the skill level 1. If I change this to skill level 6, then instead it becomes 346,000. you almost triple the amount that you can extract from a Dedenne over the course of an entire week. So, that's really where the value in leveling the skill comes from. Isn't necessarily that it makes the proc stronger, which it does do. You can see 7.36 times an Ampharos's skill proc versus 4.1. I'd be lying to say that it was not. It didn't make any impact, but you can see that it's still significant, very, very strong at early levels. And I would even recommend it for free-to-play to do this exact thing, even if you don't want to spend the skill seeds, because it is just that insane. Now, when to use the Dedenne, though, it's obviously better earlier on in the week. As I stated about, you got less chance that it wastes its procs. You got more meals left in the week that it can apply to, and realistically, unless you get down to like if you have more than 6 meals, there's still pretty low risk that you'll lose the procs. And it's not until like you get to like Saturday and Sunday that you start to see less and less value from that proc. 3 is when it really gets down to be low, and you start to see this chance of waste begin to overtake it, so that it's difficult to get that value. The risk becomes not quite worth the reward, and the lower reward might be worth the risk when you have more procs. So it's just kind of weird. There's a lot of factors to really go into this. So many so that it takes a lot of math, a lot of complicated math to really figure it out. And I've done the math here for you guys, so I hope to see that a lot of people are using this tool, because I think that it's useful to see just what the risk is and what the reward is. But in pretty much almost every circumstance, until you get past like Saturday and later is like the only time when just letting it proc once isn't necessarily fully worth it. But it's different from account to account, because a person like me making these meals that are only 100,000 is going to see less value out of it. And if you're like a brand new player and this wouldn't even be brand new, this is actually like more mid-game player. This is like the meal that I ran for the longest time. 22,000, like, this is not worth it at this point. So it's very late game cooking focused Pokemon, but you're not going to know how worth it is for you unless you figure out the math yourself. So, but the general concept is let it proc once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times if you got a really powerful meal that you're running. If you're running the best possible dish in the game, which I calculate to be this. Actually, I think this is better than the best possible dish in the game, but still, if its base value is like that much, then you know what? You can let it proc a few more times. But generally speaking, once is enough for most players, and you can get a lot of good strength out of that. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed the Dedenne video. I've really contemplated this topic a lot. It took me a while to put together this video. I hope I really explained it well. There's a lot of complicated math that goes behind it, and I was kind of struggling to figure out how to just put it all in one video that you guys can easily digest, and I hope I've done that. So if you think it was good, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments. I feel like this is just something that's going to whoosh over a lot of people's heads, because I feel like it's whooshing over my head as I've been the one to arrange this document. So yeah, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and especially if you learned something. And as always, I thank you guys for watching and hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye bye now.